Welcome back to the deep dive. It is Friday, February 6th, 2026.
Right.
And we are looking at a week in Sri Lankan politics that is, frankly, a bit of a head spinner. We've got a stack of documents here, parliamentary order papers, an opposition bulletin, and a report from something called a Thursday dialogue.
And taken together, they paint a picture of a legislature that's trying to do two very, very different things at once. It really is a split screen situation.
A split screen, yeah, that's a good way to put it.
On one side, you have this very technical, almost futuristic attempt to modernize the economy. We're talking telecom towers, shipping logistics, real estate regulation.
But on the other side of that screen,
You have a political crisis that feels very old school. Emergency regulations, hunger strikes, accusations of corruption.
right, it feels like the government is trying to upgrade the software of the country while the hardware is, catching fire.
That's a great analogy.
But before we get into the fire, which is the emergency vote happening today, I want to look at that software upgrade. Because amidst all the noise, some pretty massive changes to the economy were debated this week.
Starting with Tuesday's regulation.
Exactly. Tuesday's regulations under the Telecommunications Act.
Gazette known 239632. It doesn't sound very exciting, I know.
No, it doesn't.
But this is a fundamental shift in how digital infrastructure is going to be built in Sri Lanka.
I read through the Gazette, and the main headline seems to be infrastructure sharing. The logic seems sound, right? We don't want every mobile operator building their own concrete tower on the same mountain.
It's bad for the environment, it's ugly, and it's incredibly expensive. So the government is basically mandating that they share the physical assets.
It's a resource and cost optimization strategy is the official term.
Precisely. If operator A has a tower, operator B should be able to just rent space on it rather than pouring new concrete. That's the easy part.
Okay.
But did you catch the really specific prohibition in Section 6?
You mean the ban on sharing the core network?
Yes. This is where it gets technical, but, incredibly important.
I was thinking about this distinction. Sharing the tower is just sharing the steel and the power supply. It's the body.
Right.
But the core network, that's the brain, isn't it? That's where the customer data lives, the billing systems, the routing logic.
That is a perfect way to put it. The government is saying you can share the body, but you cannot share the brain. They are strictly forbidding operators from merging their intelligent core systems.
Which is interesting because if you were going for maximum efficiency, you'd share everything.
You would. But by banning core network sharing, they are trying to preserve competition. They don't want a situation where the operators become so intertwined that they just stop competing on service quality or innovation.
So infrastructure efficiency, but not a monopoly.
That's the balancing act. But here's the kicker, the timeline. The regulations say that if an operator asks to share a tower, the owner have to confirm feasibility within 7 days.
7 days.
7 days. And implementation has to start within 30.
In the corporate world, 7 days is basically 5 minutes. That seems incredibly aggressive.
It is. And that tells us the government isn't just suggesting this. They are forcing a rapid consolidation of assets. They're impatient.
And that impatience to regulate, it wasn't just in telecom. It carried right over to the shipping industry on Thursday.
The licensing of container depot operators bill.
Right. Another one where the surface level goal is modernization, but the details get a little contradictory.
Well, it's a classic regulatory bill. Previously, container depots, where all the imports and exports sit, were loosely regulated. Now everyone needs a license from the Director General of Merchant Shipping.
They're putting a sheriff in town.
And a sheriff with a very big stick. I saw the penalty for distorting competition or creating a monopoly is a fine of up to 10 million rupees or imprisonment.
So they're clearly worried about cartels controlling the logistics flow.
They are. But here's the paradox you mentioned. The bill prohibits anti-competitive behavior, which usually implies you want a free market.
But then
It gives the minister the power to prescribe fair and transparent rates.
that stopped me in my tracks, too. If you're fighting monopolies, you usually let the market set the price through competition. If the minister is setting the price based on cost recovery, isn't that government price fixing?
It is a massive intervention. You're essentially turning private container depots into a public utility where the government decides the profit margin.
Which might lower costs for exporters in the short term, but it raises a big question.
Will private companies invest in better technology or faster service if their rates are capped by a minister?
It's a command and control approach to capitalism. We want you to compete, but only at the price we tell you.
And just to show how wide the net was cast this week, They also squeezed in the second reading of the Institute of Real Estate Professionals bill.
Another attempt to formalize a sector that has been a bit chaotic. It really reinforces this theme.
What's that?
The legislative agenda this week was all about standardization and control.
Yeah. Oh, okay, so that's the legislative machinery humming along.
Right. But now we have to turn to the political reality, which was anything but standardized. The entire week has been overshadowed by the aftermath of Cyclone 𝗙𝗦𝗓 and the vote happening today, Friday the 6th, on the emergency regulations.
And this is where the narrative just completely fractures. The government has presented a resolution under the Public Security Ordinance. Their argument is pretty standard procedure.
We have a natural disaster, people are suffering, we need extraordinary powers to mobilize relief and keep order.
Exactly.
And let's play devil's advocate for the government here for a second. When you have roads washed out and power grids down, standard bureaucracy is way too slow.
Sure.
You need to be able to bypass procurement rules to get food and generators to people. So isn't the opposition just being obstructionist by voting against it?
That would be the case, except for one critical detail that the opposition bulletin points out. The government has already gone on record claiming the situation is managed.
Ah, right. The victory lap.
The victory lap. Government spokespeople have said the waters are receding, the immediate crisis is under control. So the opposition and the entire opposition group voted unanimously on this is asking a very simple question.
If you have managed the disaster, why do you need to extend emergency regulations?
It's a logic trap. You can't claim competency and emergency at the same time.
And because of that contradiction, the opposition is alleging something much more sinister.
They claim these regulations aren't about the floods anymore. They're about the 17,000 teachers currently on the streets.
The school development officers. This was the flashpoint of the week, wasn't it?
It was. You have 17,000 education workers who haven't been absorbed into the permanent staff despite a massive teacher shortage. They are protesting, and the opposition believes the emergency regulations are actually a tool to suppress these protests.
All under the guise of public security.
Precisely.
There was a really heated moment in the House about this. The leader of the House tried to dismiss the strike, saying the teachers were just puppets of the opposition.
He claimed the unions had practically confessed to the president that they were being manipulated, which was a very risky narrative to push.
Why is that?
Because the teachers immediately clacked back. We have the statement from 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, the secretary of the Officers Association. He didn't mince words. He clarified that, yes, they met with politicians.
But specifically mentioned ministers 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 and 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏.
Exactly. Not just opposition figures. And he flatly denied they were being used. It adds a layer of credibility to his rebuttal, you know. It suggests they're engaging with the system on their own terms.
But the fear remains. The opposition pointed out that provisions of the Prevention of Terrorism Act, the PTA, are being woven into these disaster regulations.
And when you mix disaster relief with anti-terrorism, you create a legal environment where a teacher blocking a road to ask for a job could be treated as a threat to national security.
Which brings us to the economic anxiety that's fueling all of this. We talked about the shipping bill, but the debates on the floor revealed some pretty terrifying structural issues in the economy.
The one that really caught my eye was the coal tender.
The emergency procurement issue. MP Rohini Kaviratne called it a gold mine for corrupt elements.
That's a very strong accusation.
It is. But again, let's go back to the devil's advocate position. If we need coal to keep the lights on, and the standard tender process takes 6 months, don't we have to do emergency procurement sometimes?
The opposition's counter-argument is, why is it an emergency? They argue that the coal requirement is predictable. We know how much the power plants burn every year.
So waiting until the last minute to declare an emergency is a choice.
It's a choice that allows you to bypass the competitive bidding process, which usually results in paying a premium.
A premium that goes right onto the electricity bill of the consumer.
And the small and medium enterprises, the SMEs.
Which are already getting crushed. The opposition leader laid out a pretty grim picture for small businesses. High electricity costs, high fuel costs, no access to refinancing.
But he brought up a global trade stat that I think is the sleeper story of the week, the tariff comparison with the U.S. and India.
This is huge, and I'm glad you brought it up because it got completely buried under the shouting matches.
So what did he say?
He noted that the U.S. and India have reduced their reciprocal tariffs to 18%.
Meaning it's cheaper for them to trade with each other.
Significantly cheaper. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka hasn't adjusted its tariff structures. So if you are a garment manufacturer in Sri Lanka trying to sell to the US, you are suddenly facing a massive price disadvantage compared to an Indian manufacturer.
That is a silent killer. We can argue about emergency regulations and teachers all day.
But if our shirts cost 20% more to land in New York than Indian shirts, the factory closes. End of story.
And that is a policy failure, not a disaster failure. That is about not reading the global economic room.
And speaking of internal fights, we can't ignore the clash between the speaker and the parliament staff.
That was ugly. Usually, the speaker is the referee. But here, you had this conflict over the removal of the Deputy Secretary General, with allegations of bribery flying around.
When the referee is getting into fistfights with the staff, the game is in trouble.
It just contributes to this feeling of institutional decay.
But, and I want to pivot here, because this deep dive isn't just about the problems. Amidst all this chaos, there was a group of people who actually sat down and came up with a plan.
The Thursday Dialogue.
This was a panel discussion with experts like Prof. 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗏𝗦𝗖𝗥𝗕𝗓𝗏, a hydrological engineer, and Dr. 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗏𝗕𝗏𝗧, a psychiatrist. And reading their report, it felt like stepping into a different universe.
They weren't arguing about who met whom. They were looking at the cyclone and asking, how do we stop this from happening again?
They produced a 16-point plan. And what struck me was that it wasn't just send more food, it was structural.
For instance, their top recommendation was a National Disaster Resilience Authority.
But we have a disaster management center, though, so why do we need another authority?
The experts argue that the current center is just a coordinator. It just pushes paper. They want an authority with enforcement power, a body that can legally stop people from building on floodplains.
That distinction between coordination and enforcement is key. But the point that really blew my mind was the water release permit system.
This is a perfect example of a bureaucratic fix for a physical problem. Professor Lau pointed out that a lot of the flooding wasn't just rain. It was reservoir engineers opening sluice gates without warning.
Which is terrifying. You're downstream, it stops raining, you think you're safe, and suddenly a wall of water hits you because someone 10 miles upstream just turned a valve.
Exactly. So the experts are proposing a formal permit system. You cannot release water without a permit and a scheduled public warning. It forces the different water management agencies to actually talk to each other.
Before they drown a village, it seems so obvious.
And yet it requires a policy change.
The other part of the report that felt very distinct was the focus on the human mind. Dr. 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗏𝗧 input on community-based psychosocial support.
This is usually completely ignored. We count the cost of damaged houses, but we don't count the cost of trauma. The report explicitly states that the mental collapse of victims is overlooked.
And they linked it to dignity. Point 12. Restore dignity and livelihoods.
That is such a powerful framing. When you're standing in a line waiting for a bag of rice because your house is gone, you lose your sense of self-worth.
The experts are saying that recovery isn't just about calories, it's about treating victims as citizens, not beggars.
And finally, they talked about money. A national disaster insurance scheme.
Because the state can't bail everyone out every single time, most Sri Lankans don't have home insurance. One flood can wipe out generational wealth.
So they're calling for a national safety net mechanism so that risk is pooled.
Okay, so let's synthesize all this. We have this incredible contrast. On the parliamentary floor, they are screaming about emergency powers, calling each other puppets, debating whether coal tenders are rigged. The focus is on control and survival.
And in the committee room, experts are calmly laying out a blueprint for a resilience authority, water permits, and psychological support. The focus there is on prevention and dignity.
And the tragedy is that these two worlds just aren't connecting. The government is asking for emergency powers to manage the disaster. But are they going to use those powers to implement the 16-point expert plan?
That is the ultimate question for you, the listener. The telecom bill shows the government can move fast when it wants to modernize infrastructure.
The shipping bill shows they aren't afraid to intervene in the market. So the capability is there.
The capability is absolutely there. But the intent is what is on the ballot with this emergency regulation vote. If the regulations pass, will they be used to enforce water release permits and build a resilience authority?
Or, as the opposition fears, will they be used to silence the teachers and the critics?
It's the difference between using power to fix the system or using power to protect yourself from the system. And if you look at the coal tender and the tariff issue, it suggests that emergency is becoming a business model.
What do you mean by that?
If you stay in emergency mode, You don't have to fix the trade tariffs or follow tender procedures. You just react. The experts are asking the government to stop reacting and start building.
That's a sobering thought. We often think of emergency as a temporary state, but in politics, it can easily become a permanent comfort zone.
And that's why reading the fine print matters.
We will have to wait and see how the vote goes today. But for now, that is your deep dive into a very volatile week. From the core network of your cell phone to the psychological resilience of flood victims, it's all connected. Thanks for listening.
Goodbye.